do one more test here. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test, okay. Greetings. Thank you for joining us. My name is Pastor Keith with Grace Baptist Church, and we are thankful that you have come to join us for our online Bible study. We do have a couple things. Just want to invite you to, if you want to get plugged, you just want to hit the arrow key or the space key. We would like to invite you to come and join us in our worship. We have worship at 11 o'clock on Sundays, and we'd love to have you come and be a part of that. If you live locally, we're going to have a fellowship right here in our church on Sunday after church. We're going to have some potluck dinner, and you're going to come be a part of that. We'd sure love to have you come and participate in that with us. And also, if you're also hungry for the Word of God, we also have Sunday school, which is at 9:40 on Sunday mornings as well. And so we're going to go ahead and let's take a moment and pray as we prepare to go into God's Word here in just a moment. Father, we want to thank you so much for all those who have joined us this morning, or whatever time they're watching. We're thankful, Father, as we are preparing now to go into the Christmas season. A lot of excitement in the air, but yet we also know it's filled with a lot of hurt, anxieties, and things that, Father, that sometimes seem insurmountable. Our desire, Father, is that your word would bring freedom and hope, where when we look at the world, we just don't get that same freedom and same hope. Lord, we want to pray that Spirit of the living God, you would speak through me to us, Father, that we might gain a greater understanding of what the true Christmas spirit is. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want to talk today about the true Christmas spirit. So you probably know this. You probably recognize this if you watch like any Christmas movies, right? They were at that time of year when we're celebrating Christmas. You can see it in the stores, the lights on houses, the music on the radios, the stories on the television. This is the story "It's a Wonderful Life," and I really like this movie. Right? I used to watch this at my father-in-law's house. He had a fireplace. And for some reason, I just love to sit by the fire, hear the crackling of it, and watch this movie. And it's a story about this guy that he's really depressed, right? And he's having a hard time because he didn't get to live all of his dreams and things like that. And the angel takes him back, and he sees his past, present, and future, and he gets an idea of what his life has had an impact in the community and stuff. That's a good story, right? It definitively makes you feel good. But the question that I would pose to you was it the Christmas spirit, right? Or here's another old favorite, right? This is the White Christmas. A lot of great songs and a lot of great dancing. A story about this group of people that pull together some song and dance show and honor an old general, and a lot of good feelings in there as well. And does this convey the true spirit of Christmas? Or what about this one? This one. This is a Christmas Carol. Like, there have been so many different versions of a Christmas Carol made, right? And it's about this guy who's a Scrooge, and he doesn't like Christmas, bah humbug, right? And he sees the ghost of Christmas past and present and the future. By the end of the story, he's changed, and we like that, right? It's a good story. And if you've never seen it, well, I encourage you to go ahead and read the book or watch one of the versions of it. But it's a good story. It's a story about a redemption, But here was this man and you can see he goes back in the past, and the angel shows him, wait, maybe you weren't such a bad guy before, now what's happened? And so there's definitely some redemptive natures. Of course, the Muppets have done their own version of that too. Magoo, of course, there's the Magoo the cartoon version, and there's lots of different versions, and we watch a few of them every year. But here's another one of my favorites, right? This is the Grinch, right? How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and the whole idea about, he can't stand the fact that everybody's so happy. And so he goes down and he tries to kill that by stealing all the presents and things like that. And of course, you have the original Dr. Seuss version that was made into a cartoon, 30-minute show. But then you have the Jim Carrey version, which is really good. They put a lot of good details and stuff out in there. There's another version that's come out recently. I haven't been tempted to watch that one yet. But in any case, it's a story about what happens. He finally discovers, oh wow, it wasn't about the presents after all, and it talks about his heart growing. Another redemptive story, right? Or what about the Charlie Brown Christmas? Another famous one we watched came out in the '60s, and Charlie Brown finds this little tree, and everybody's mocking him and making fun of him, and he goes through into this depression, and then finally people come around with the right, Christmas spirit, and they change their idea of Charlie Brown and his Christmas tree. And or what about this one you've seen? This is a really popular one, right? Home Alone, and they've made a series of that now, and even have used different kids, but a lot of the idea of the little kid saving himself and his family and things like that. A lot of good feel good there. But this was an interesting one to me. This next one was the Chronicles of Christmas. They've done one, and there's a second one. I haven't watched the second one yet, but here's what's interesting is this guy, I think his name is Kurt Russell, plays the part of Santa Claus, and of course he's got the magical powers going around, but he wears on his watch, or on his wrist, he wears a little thing called it's like a Christmas spirit measuring device. And so he's going throughout the show looking, oh wow, we're down on the Christmas spirit. And so as we're thinking about this, as we're getting ready to go into the Christmas season, we think about what is the Christmas spirit. Our culture and our world has their idea of what the Christmas spirit is. And a lot of these shows and things that we have talked about, and there's many more, there's thousands and thousands of Christmas shows, and I'm sure there's many that you can name, that they talk about. There are elements of them that have some redemptive ideas about that are true, the elements of the true Christmas spirit. But they're missing part of the message. Even Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, right? Here are these two. You got the little elf that's having, he's an outcast, and then you got Rudolph, who's an outcast because of his glowing red nose, but then they get redeemed in the end because Rudolph gets, his glowing nose, and the other kid wants to become a dentist, and he becomes that. And so that redemptiveness is something that we really like, but that's only part of the whole story. And I think what we want to talk about today is the true spirit of Christmas. And this is going to be a little mini series that we're going to do between now and Christmas. But in understanding the true Christmas spirit, we have to understand some things, and it starts with understanding first that we only can have the true Christmas spirit when we have an encounter with the true God. And that's what we're going to talk about today. That may raise questions up in your mind. And you're going to say, well, Pastor, there's a lot of good redemptive things that are happening without God being involved. And I understand where you're coming from. But just if you would hear me out, I'd appreciate it, and I'd thank you for staying with us. But I want to look at this main point today, which is that the true spirit of Christmas starts when God confronts us in holiness and we experience His unmerited grace. So there's a double-sided whammy to this. That if we really want to come to the place where we truly understand what the spirit of Christmas is, that we have to understand there's two aspects to that. One is we're confronted by God. And we're confronted by Him, and He's a holy God. He's a just God. He's a righteous God. And so there is that sense when we come in contact with Him, we become greatly or hugely aware of our inadequacies. But then the other side of that is we realize that just as deep as His holiness goes, His grace also goes that much deeper. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. And we're going to be talking about this point. And I hope that as we go through this, as we think about what the true Christmas spirit is, that as we go through this holiday season, this Christmas season, that it will be food for fodder. Give you some things to think about, and hopefully prompt you to want to maybe read God's Word a little bit more, maybe think this through just or hopefully even a lot more. So we're going to be reading from Luke chapter 1, verses 26 to 38. And so if you want to go ahead and take your Bible and turn to the Gospel of Luke. It's the third book in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, and then Luke will come right after that. And we're going to be looking in Luke chapter 1. And so we're going to be, if you want to go ahead and turn there. And would you stand in honor of the reading of God's Word? I know I can't see you, and I'm not here to make any kind of judgment calls, but standing is an outward expression of what's happening in our heart. And we're saying, hey, listen, Lord, we want to honor you and to honor your word. So starting in verse 26, we'll be reading through verse 38 of God's word. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man named Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and the angel came to her and said, "Greetings, favored woman, the Lord is with you." But she was deeply troubled by this statement and wondered what kind of greeting this would be. Then the angel told her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. Now listen, you will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord will give him the throne of his father David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will have no end." Mary asked the angel, "How can this be, since I have not had sexual relations with a man?" The angel replied to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One born will be called the Son of God. And consider your relative Elizabeth. Even she has conceived a son in her old age, and this is the 6th month for her who is called childless. For nothing will be impossible with God. I am the Lord's servant," said Mary. "May it be done to me according to your word." And the angel left her. This is the word of the Lord. So what we're talking about here now, basically, is this is a scenario where Luke is recording an incident that happened with a young lady. Her name was Mary. Excuse me. But this is basically, it's communication from heaven, right? This is a time when the kingdom of heaven is basically coming in contact with man. It's not something that we see every day. As a matter of fact, we don't see that a lot in the ways that we would think. But we want to ask this question: why is it significant that man would hear from heaven? This is a very, very, very important question that we have to be able to understand before we can understand why this event is playing out the way it is. You see, this has to do with the grimness of human nature. If you go back to the beginning, right? You're going back into the Old Testament and you read all the way back to the beginning, it says that God created the heavens and the earth, right? What was the thing that he created on the 6th day? He created man. And his desire at that time was to create man in his image and invite them into that eternal relationship, to invite them into a relationship with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And God provided everything needed. And of course, he said, you have all the food you could want. I'm giving you a job. You can be good stewards of everything I've given you. Just don't eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And they, of course, at that moment decided, well, listen, I mean, not at that moment, but a little while later, they decided, because they were lured and tempted by Satan, but then they made the decision on their own to go ahead and eat of the tree that God had told them not to do. So they decided, what happened in their heart at that moment, there was a shift. What they said in their heart was, we don't really need God. We can do our own thing. His word is really not that important. And so now what happens is we enter into a phase in human history when now all of a sudden man is resistant towards the things about God and towards his word. And we see that start to unfold over and over and over all throughout the history of the Old Testament and in the New Testament. we see what happens. The very first two children, Cain and Abel, what happens? Cain gets angry and kills his brother. God even warned him about it. He said, Cain, sin is like a crouching tiger, man. It's going to get you if you don't watch it. And we see that all throughout the history, unfolding. And of course, sin gets so bad and it's horrible, it's despicable. There's horrible, nasty things that are happening. Child sacrifices and interspecies, sexual intercourse and all the kind of just nasty things that are going on. And of course, God sends a worldwide flood because he says that he regretted the day that they created man. But he does preserve Noah, who has a heart for God and for the things of God, and his family. And of course, when they get off the ark and the population begins to spread back out of the earth, what do? They build a Tower of Babel, and again, they're trying to exalt themselves. And we see this constant repetition over and over of history, that our propensity is to disregard God's word and to say, you know what, God, I don't want anything to do with you. I remember one time I was giving you probably have, I don't know if you've ever heard this. This book is called The Story. Basically, this is it's great. If you haven't read this, it's basically the scripture put together in a chronological format. Not all of it, but key stories that kind of give you a bird's eye view of what's happened in the past, all the way through what Jesus Christ did, what we're into the age now, into the church, and into the future. Kind of gives you an overview of that. But I highly recommend that if you haven't read that. But I gave that to a friend that worked at a post office, and I said, well, what did you think when you read that? She said, I am utterly amazed at how wicked and how evil, how man keeps sinning against God. It became blatantly obvious. And so there is this grimness that exists, that why is it so significant that there would be any encounter with God, with human beings? Because of the way that we treat him. Now let's put this in perspective for a minute. If we're honest, all of us have come in contact with someone in our life that has offended us in some way or another. Maybe you might take a minute to think about it. But has there ever been someone who treated you in such a way that you didn't want to be with them? Because they treated you indignantly? They treated you as you were less than a human being? They treated you like in some sort of way that made you just feel really bad. We've all come in contact with people like that. What happens? How do we respond to that? Dude, we don't want to be around them. We don't want to spend the time getting to know them, or we don't, even more significantly, we don't want to open up our vulnerabilities to them, because that's giving them more avenue to hurt us. Am I right? Right? You see what I'm saying? And even if we do, we say, okay, well, maybe it was a relative or someone who's a close friend, and we want to give them another go, and then they turn around and hurt us again. And what do? We close up even harder, and we say, I'm not going to really have anything to do with that. But when we understand the fact that God is wanting to come and speak to the human race, even though it is not natural for us to want to have anything to do with him. And we have to be careful. Like sometimes we think that because we're being religious, or because we're being involved in church, or because we're doing some things that we are trying to we're trying to exalt our own character in some kind of way and say, hey, look what kind of good person I am. That is actually a stumbling block, and that actually can keep us from understanding who truly God is. And so the reality is that all of us as human beings, we're all in a relationship. In a relationship that is anti-God. We don't really want to have anything to do with him. He's not someone, we don't wake up thinking about him, and not on a regular basis. And so the fact that God wants to do this, it's incredible. And that's where we find ourselves in this situation, that God would want to communicate to the human race. And so that's where we find ourselves in verse 26. It says, in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to the town in Galilee called Nazareth. Now, the angel Gabriel, one of the archangels, one of the angels that are high in authority up in heaven, is an angel by its very nature is a messenger, and so that he's doing what angels do. He's coming and he's presenting a message. But look at where he goes. He goes to a town in Galilee called Nazareth. Now, we know about Nazareth now because it's been made famous from the stories about Christmas. But it wasn't really a very significant town. It was a small, obscure little place. And so, of all the places that God wants to send Gabriel to send a message to, is this small, obscure place, seemingly out in the middle of almost nowhere, right? And who does he go to when he wants to go to this? He goes to a virgin engaged to a man named Joseph. Now, here's a woman. She would have probably been maybe 14, 15 years old. She would have been a young woman as she's preparing to engage. She's betrothed, or she's engaged to this man named Joseph. She's about to make a big change in her life. She's about to take on, she's going to be leaving her father's house, and she's going to be taking on her own family and starting and raising her own kids with her own husband. And so she's in this mindset. And especially as a young woman, right, who's probably, like we said a minute ago, 14 or 15 years old. And this is happening all over the world. This is what's been going on, right? Women are getting married to their husbands and they're starting families. This has been going on for generation to generation. So this is a common thing, a common place. And yet here it is where God chooses to engage or to communicate with man. And what is he communicating? He is communicating a long anticipated message. We have to understand some of the background here. Okay? Notice what he says. He says, she was of the house of David. Now, what exactly does that mean? Who is David? Well, if you read through the scriptures, or if you were to read through the story that we were talking about, David was one of the patriarchs of the faith, or maybe a monarch. He was a king that God had anointed to be king over the nation of Israel. The reason God loved him was because David was a man who had a heart for God. You've heard, many people have heard the story of David and Goliath. It's a lot of times twisted, maybe a little bit, but everybody's heard of it. A lot of people know that David, in the beginning, was a small kid, and he was a shepherd. And he was often left by himself, out in the wilderness to take care of the sheep. But he, during that time, had a lot of time to contemplate about God and his goodness, and his faith grew during that time. So much so that even when the sheep were endangered by a bear or a lion, he fought off both the bears and lions. Him facing the giant Goliath didn't mean anything to him. Why? Because he was more concerned about his God and about the reputation of his God. So he developed, and the story goes on. There's a lot to the story that we don't have time to explain. But he goes on to be a man, after the Bible refers to him as a man after God's own heart. And there was, of course, a lot of things that did, because he was a sinful man, just like the rest of us. There were some things that he did that were not good. And one of those was he had committed murder and he had committed adultery. But in any case, he had also killed a lot of people in war. And one of his desires was he wanted to build, he realized that God had brought him up and put him into this position of being a king. And he lived in this big palace. And he looks over there and he says, you know what, here's our God, the God of all glory, the God who's created heavens and earth. And what's he dwelling in? He's dwelling in a tabernacle. He's dwelling in a tent. So he wants to go, he says, you know, God, I want to build you a house. And God's response was that, no, you're not going to do this. But he still wanted to honor David because of his belief, because of the way he trusted him. And so he said, he told the prophet Samuel, he said, tell David this, when your time comes and you rest with your ancestors. Now, that's just a nice way of saying, David, when you die, what's going to happen? I will raise up after you a descendant who will come from your body. What? What is he talking about, coming from your body? That's going to be his own seed. In other words, when David have kids of his own, his kids are going to have kids, and their kids are going to have kids, and their kids are going to have kids, right? That's the passing on of the generation. And so he's saying that through this seed line, he is going to have a descendant that's going to come from him. And what is he going to do? He says, I will establish his kingdom. His kingdom is what I'm going to establish as being permanent. What? So now, who is he talking about? Okay, David knew that God was going to do this, and he lived with this anticipation that God would do this. He believed God was going to do this, but he didn't understand all the ramifications of who that was going to be or what it was all about. But he goes on and he says, he is the one who will build a house in my name. Right? In other words, David, you flip to the next one. In other words, David, you want to build my house, but I want to tell you who this descendant is going to be. He's going to be the one that's going to build my house. And who was that descendant? It was Jesus, right? And who was that Jesus? Coming through the line of David, which was Mary. That's why he says, through the house of David. Because God is about to establish. God saying, listen, David was concerned about God being in tent. God really was never really concerned. That wasn't really an issue for him. The ultimate place that God has been trying to abide and trying to live ultimately is right here in our heart. In our ambitions, in our desires, in our passions. That our desires, everything that he has, we have. And everything that who he is, we are. That's what he's ultimately trying to do. And so it's only Jesus who is going to be able to build this true house, you see. And he goes on and he says, I will establish the kingdom forever. I will be his father and he will be my son. And he even goes on later and he talks about, actually even in the next verse, and he goes on talking about how he will punish his son for his sins. Well, Jesus didn't have sins. He took our sins. And that's what he punishes him for, you see. So there is this long anticipated hope that David has been looking forward to in his lifetime. But he died, didn't see it. But it's not just with David. I mean, this goes all the way back to Abraham, right? If you flip over, we were studying back in John chapter 8, verse 56. Jesus was talking to some of the religious people, and they were bragging about the fact that because they were Jews, they were descendants of Abraham. And Jesus was confronting them. He's saying, listen, if you really were descendants of Abraham, in other words, if you had the kind of faith that he had, your heart would be completely different. Why? These religious people, they hated Jesus. They were trying to kill Jesus. Why? Because he was not obeying their established rules of religion. What was he doing? He was living a holy and righteous life, but loving the sinners. And they did not like that. And so that's why they were mad at him. They were finding any way they could to try to kill him. Or if we go on and we look at Hebrews, the next one, Hebrews, he's referring to Abraham and his family. He says, all these died in faith, although they had not received the things promised. In other words, Abraham was living with an anticipation that God was going to raise up a deliverer, someone who was going to fix the sin problem. But he died not seeing it. He knew it was going to come through him. He knew it was going to come through his son Isaac. He says, but, look what it says, but they saw them from a distance, and greeted them, and confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents living on earth. In other words, what they were saying was, okay, we see God's promise and we know his promise. We have not received it in our life. We have not experienced it in our life, but we believe it to be true. You see. So, there has been this long anticipated awaiting. And now, all of a sudden, who is it that finally gets to see this promise fulfilled? Is it a king with lots of armies and limitless funds at his disposal? Is it a politician? Is it a wealthy person? It's none of these. Look who it is. It's a virgin's name, whose name was Mary. It's a small girl who was just young, starting out her life, had no, other than being in the lineage of David, otherwise had no pedigree that the world would have considered as significant. She was just a virgin. She's not even experienced in many things in life. And this is where God chooses to communicate with man. I'm hoping you're starting to see the significance of why this is such a big deal. And the fact that he's coming through a woman like this. And you got to remember also, women in that culture also had a kind of a lower position. So here God's choosing to come to a woman. She's a virgin, and she's a young woman. And so what we're going to see is the response, and we're going to look at Mary's response, and we're going to learn 4 things about Mary's response that can help us to determine if we have the true Christmas spirit. So as we're going through this, and as you're thinking about, listen, as we're going through this, you're going to see some of this, and you say, well, Pastor, I see some of these redemptive qualities in some of these movies. Yes, we do. But we're gonna get a true picture of what the spirit of Christmas looks like and how that affects us. You see, the spirit of Christmas affected Mary, and it affected the way she behaved. It affected the things that she saw, and affected the way she encountered those. That's what we're going to be looking at. So, verse 28 says, the angel came to her and said, greetings, favored woman, the Lord is with you. Now, this sounds like to us, in our culture, in our time, we're reading this, what are we going to do? Hey, man, that's a pretty nice greeting. This is going to be like, yeah, man. Like, think about the scenario. You go to work and your boss, your boss comes to you and says, man, I really like the way you've been performing. I've seen the way you've drafted up your reports. I've seen how you diligently handle problems that have come your way. I've seen how you have dealt with other people and how you've managed them. What is that going to do for you? You're going to go, well, man, my boss likes me. What is that going to do as far as hope goes, right? You're going to be thinking, okay, if this boss is saying this about me, then maybe I'll get a raise. Maybe I'll get a promotion. If my boss really likes me, this is going to create good feelings, right? Am I right? Or maybe a parent. Maybe you have a parent, or maybe you are a parent, and you're in that child relationship, parent-child relationship. And the parent comes and says, "Son, I really like how you have really taken on the responsibility of tending to the yard. We've been going through some tough times. I've never had to go out and remind you to cut the grass, or I've never had to go out and tell you to put your clothes away and stuff." You're going to be like, "Oh yeah, Dad noticed." Or Mom noticed how I've been keeping up with the dishes. And what is it going to do? Is create those good feelings. In hopes, maybe it'll be increased allowance, maybe it'll be whatever it might be. There's those kinds of things that happen when people, when they show us favor, it generally generates good feelings. And so we'd ask this question, okay, here's the question: what type of reaction would you anticipate that Mary would have with this encounter? You would think, okay, this is, God is saying to Mary, you are favored. So we're thinking, yeah, God, you have got something for me. Yes, I am lined up. I'm ready to go. But look what happened. This is so critically important we understand this. Look what he says. But she was deeply troubled by this statement. What? Wait a minute. This is not what we would expect. She was deeply troubled by saying that God favored her. That word there, deeply troubled, if you look in the Greek, is actually diaterazo, which means confused, perplexed, troubled to an extraordinary extent or degree. In other words, this is like, there is another word that's often translated troubled, and it's just terasso. They take off the diaterazo, right? But this is like a deeper, and it's only used one time in this encounter that Mary has. You see, when the disciples, you remember when Jesus is walking, the disciples out fishing, right? Here comes Jesus walking on the water. And they thought they saw what? A ghost. It says that they were what? Troubled. They were terrasa. That's a common word. But this one goes so much deeper. So why would she be troubled by what? Look, it says, it goes on the next one, he says she's troubled by the what? In the next verse, she's troubled by this statement. The word there, statement, is the word logos. Okay, it means word, message, communication. Communication often through a spoken means. That's what's happening here. The communication is being spoken. She's troubled by this message. This does not make human sense to us. Why would she be troubled? Right? You should ask this question. Because this has to do with the whole foundation, the whole spirit of Christmas. Okay? You see this question that you see right here. Why is Mary troubled by this statement? By this message? Greetings, favored woman, the Lord is with you. Here's the reason. The reason is this. When we encounter the holiness of God, we'll see on the next slide. When we encounter the holiness of God, we are troubled by our lack of holiness. See, we don't really think about this. See, there is a very real sense that when we understand the nature of God, right? That God is a holy God. As a matter of fact, the Bible even talks about him being a consuming fire. Why a consuming fire? Because he is very, very perfect. You ever been in the presence of somebody who is like really good? Sometimes it can be intimidating. God is so holy that to be in him, like to be in his presence, is to recognize our unholiness, you see. See, if we're honest, we see that we're completely unworthy of being in his favor. We see this all throughout the scripture, right? What happened when Adam and Eve, go back to the beginning, when Adam and Eve disobeyed God and they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, when God came, what did they do? They went and hid. They tried to make fig leaves to cover up the shame that they experienced from disobeying God's word. You see, and we see all throughout the scripture, every time someone encounters the holiness of God, every time they come across him, that we see that there's a sense of like scariness. Even when the Israelites, they're like Moses is going hanging out with God all the time, and the Israelites, well, you keep talking to him, we want to see him. So they have all these festive things and ceremonies to get ready for them to confront God. And what happens when he comes? They're scared to death of him because he's huge, he's holy, and there is a sense of righteousness and judgment that comes along with that. We understand that intuitively. Even Moses, who was close to God, as he walked with God, never saw God in all of his full glory. And but he asked him, he said, can I see you in all your glory? And what does God do? God says, I'll show you my glory. But there's going to be like two rocks, and it's going to be split right down them, and there's going to be like a little tiny gap. So I will pass by that gap so you can see part of my glory. And even in that, I'm going to put up my hand so that as I'm walking between this little sliver of gap and I got my hand up, you're going to get a glimpse of my glory. Why in the world would God not just, if Moses is asking to see his glory, why would he not reveal it in full? Why? It would kill him. You see, that's why it's significant that God would speak to the human race, and why he's coming now to speak to Mary in this way, because she is realizing what? His holiness and his greatness and his perfectness. And she understands that sense of judgment. She understands that there is this weight of what she carries of like, I cannot measure up to this man. There's no way up to this God. There's no way I can measure up to him. And that's where this weight comes in at, you see. And God reveals his holiness at different levels according to our needs. Like he did with Moses that day. How's he doing it to Mary? He sends Mary an angel, right? God himself is not coming, but it's as if he's coming. But he's coming, an angel, a messenger is coming So there is that sense of this angel comes from the presence of God and is baked in and surrounded by the glory and the presence of God, Shekinah glory. And he's coming with a holy message. Okay? So, but even in that sense, it's partially veiled so that Mary she's not dying from it. And so there's that very real sense, that this understanding of when we come in contact with God's holiness, we understand that we are unworthy. And the spirit of Christmas starts with this. This is where it starts. There is a feeling of unworthiness to be in his presence, to be with him, and to have what he has, and to be even in a relationship with him. But the second thing that we learn when we think about the spirit of Christmas, the true spirit of Christmas, is that when we encounter the holiness of God, it causes us to look deeply into ourselves and to evaluate our very foundations and beliefs. Look what happens here in verse 29. Second half of verse 29. It says, wondering what kind of greeting this should be. She's wondering, what is this all about? She's not somebody important that God would come and do all this. That word, actually, the word wondering, is dialogue izamai. And I'm probably not pronouncing it right, but that's okay. I want you to see two things. One is to engage in deep thought, wait, or consider. And look at this next part. You see this part, this dialogue, the idea of conversation, kind of where he says, as if having an internal discussion with oneself about something. Have you ever been in that situation where you're having a conversation, something happens and you start, like, maybe it's something hard and you start questioning yourself. Right? It happened to me in boot camp when the drill instructors are like yelling at you, like, and you're going, oh crap, why did I do this again? Right? You start questioning yourself. Why did you put yourself in this kind of situation? And we do that to ourselves when we go through difficult times, when we make bad mistakes or bad choices, and we're suffering the consequences and those things. And it causes us to go into this deep thinking, right? We see the same word actually in Mark chapter 2. This is the context of this. Is there is some guys who have a friend that's paralyzed. They know who Jesus is, and they understand his ability to heal. They have no question in their mind that he's God. But Jesus is, and so what they want to do is they want to get Jesus, they want to get their friend to Jesus so Jesus can heal him. Nothing wrong with that. But the problem is, Jesus is inside of a house. And there's a lot of people there watching, but among those people, there's also the religious Jewish people who have their own systems that we were talking about earlier. And so what are they going to do? Well, the only way we can do this is to go take part of the roof and lower him down in the roof. This is the way they are determined. What an incredible group of friends, right? They are determined to get him in. So they lower his body down, and Jesus knows exactly what they want, but he's trying to teach the Pharisees a lesson, or the religious people. He says, your sins are forgiven. A simple statement like that. And look what happened. It says, but some of the scribes, the religious people, right, were sitting there questioning. They were having a dialogue in their hearts. Why does he speak like this? He's blaspheming. In other words, he's saying something that only God would say. He's disrupting their spirit of religion. He's disrupting their thought process. And the very thing is, who can forgive sins but God alone? What the whole purpose of Jesus is trying to do at that moment, he's trying to show everybody there who he is. He's saying, yes, you're right. Only God can truly forgive sins. And if you stayed with us through previous studies, we understand that ultimately when we sin, we're sinning against God, right? And so ultimately we ask him for forgiveness. But who could forgive sins but God alone? Ultimately, he's the only one that's holy, so he's the only one that can. And so they're looking at this where this should have been an event that should cause them to question and say, could this really be God? What do? They back away from that even more, and they say no. They didn't want him to kill him, right? You see, and so they go through this process of questioning and shaking at their very foundation. That's what happened with Mary. She's questioning everything. Her life, she was a simple woman who just, experienced what it was like to grow up in her house, and now she's about to have her own house, and she's experiencing all the normal questions that we all go through and experience when we start our own families or prepare to start our own. As we go into different chapters in our life, we have lots of questions. She's going through all of that since she's thinking about this whole thing. So we ask this question then, what might have a young 14 or 15-year-old virgin have been considering so deeply? What might have caused her to shake all this up? And this is what we'd say. This is what I would say. I would say, among other things, she would be thinking, why would a holy God send down a holy messenger to an unworthy servant girl from a small town? It makes no sense to me. I have absolutely nothing to offer you. And you see, this is where that spirit of Christmas that we talked about, that's a little bit different. Like when we talk about It's a Wonderful Life or these other shows that we're talking about, it's like they're showing, oh yeah, God, I do have something to offer. And when we're talking about in terms of how we serve each other, we do have things to offer. But when it comes to our relationship with God and what we can do to better ourselves or to get in that grade, there's absolutely nothing we can offer. Absolutely nothing. The Bible says even the good things that we have to offer are not even good, because they're tainted by our own desires. Everything is tainted by what we really want ultimately in the end. And so she's now realized this. She's come in contact with this holy God. She said, what could I possibly have to offer you? But God in his graciousness, he gives us, the angels told her, do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. This is God's unmerited favor. See, when we flip over to the next slide, we look at this. God's unmerited. He comes to Mary not because she sees herself as worthy, but it's the opposite. She doesn't see herself as worthy. You see, he's coming to her not because she has some kind of pedigree. She is of the lineage of David, but that's not viewed by the world as anything significant. That's just a fulfillment of prophecy. That's a fulfillment of what God said he was going to do. That's a demonstration of his ability throughout centuries and throughout millenniums and throughout generations to be able to fulfill his word, to be able to prove that he can do what he said he was going to do. So Mary is understanding her unworthiness. And you see, part of that Christmas spirit, that is understanding we're unworthy. We're all unworthy. None of us have anything to offer God. We're all just beggars, trying to help other beggars find out where to get the bread. You see, so that's another part of that true Christmas spirit. But then third, when we encounter God, he calls us to what seems like impossible odds that lead to cautious doubt. Now, I want to talk about the cautious doubt, what we talked about, right? Sometimes God says he calls us to do things, and he says for us to do things that sometimes just don't seem right for us from human perspective. We measure it and say, God, why would I do that? See, look at this scenario that Mary's in. Verse 31, it says, now listen, you will conceive and give birth to a son. Any mother's hope, right? Doesn't seem too far-fetched so far. But it goes deeper. It says, and you will name him Jesus. Oh. Right away we discover that there's something deeper going on, because normally a parent would have the right to choose their own child's name because they raise them, they teach them, they nurture them, they give them a name generally, especially in Old Testament culture. The name matches according to some kind of virtue, or it has meaning. And now all of a sudden, she's not, as a parent, she's not having the opportunity to give this child a name. The name has already been chosen for her. So she's starting to realize that there's, so I might give birth. I'm expecting that I probably would do that as a mother, because I'm going to be married to Joseph. But it says, you're going to name him Jesus. But then he goes on and he says, and then he starts getting really deep with the promise. He says, and he will be great. Oh, what parent or child could ensure that their son or child is going to be great? We have no control over what our children do and the decisions that they make. That's the decisions that they make, right? But then he goes on and he says, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. What now? All of a sudden, here really is getting radical. Now something is really shifting here, because now all of a sudden you're going to say that the child that I'm going to carry is going to be considered the Son of the Most High. Who is the Most High? He used this term here. He's referring to God Himself. Now she's realizing the heaviness of what is about to happen. And the Lord God will give him a throne of his father David. What? He is going to give him this kingdom? And he goes on in verse 33, he goes even farther. He says, he will reign over the house of Jacob. What is the house of Jacob? That's all the descendants of Jacob, who God promised that through him he was going to, through each of the patriarchs, he promised that he would send and deliver. He's going to reign over the house of Jacob. In other words, he's going to be the ultimate authority, and his kingdom will have no end. In other words, it's going to go on forever and ever and ever. You see, this is something much bigger than what Mary could actually ever do anything about. She could have no influence over this. But she does have some cautious doubt. She asks a very reasonable question in verse 34. Look what she says. How can this be, since I have not had sexual relations with a man? Legitimate question. Everybody would have understood that. Everybody would have asked that question. But the angel gives the answer. So in verse 35, the angel replied to her, the Holy One will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One who is born will be called Son of God. In other words, you are going to be conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit. Whoa. This is so radical. Who's going to ever believe something like this? We have been living generation after generation, millennia after millennia, of a husband and a man mating together and having marital relations, and then children being a result of that. We have never seen anything like this. This seems like absurd. Who's going to ever believe something like this? But even in God's graciousness, the angel furthers the message in verse 36, and he says, consider your relative Elizabeth. Even she has conceived a son in her old age, and this is the 6th month for her who was called barren. Here's one of her relatives who couldn't have children, and now all of a sudden she's old, and she's all of a sudden able to conceive. And who's she going to give birth to? John the Baptist. John the Baptist is going to come and point the way for Jesus, right? But even in this whole scenario, right? God has already done this in the past. Like there has been, He gave Abraham's wife Sarah the ability to conceive at old age, but this other has never been done. And so what's happened? So God is saying, listen, if He can do this, He can do that. He says, why in verse 37, for nothing is impossible with God. You see, so when God is calling us, sometimes there is a reasonable amount of doubt that we can have, a reasonable amount of questions that we might ask that He has answers for. And if it's something like that, like, God, how can you possibly, God, you're saying, Pastor, you don't know the sins I've committed. You don't know the depth or to the level of what I've done. There's no way God could forgive me. But listen, this is the part of you don't understand the nature of God or the depth of His character or the price that Jesus paid. You see, when we say He can't take care of my sin, we're saying that He's not powerful enough to do that. When in fact, His grace is so much more. It just abounds, and it's not impossible for God to forgive us or to change us. Or when He calls us to a task, when He calls us to be, when you're saying, wait a minute, God calls us to be holy? How can I be holy? Listen, there's things in each of our lives that we know that we struggle with. And we say, God, how can I be like that, right? I have those questions in my life. God, how can I be like this? Look, I'm struggling with these things. How can I possibly be this way? But what God is saying, nothing is impossible. He's changing, he's working, he's doing these things. And so part of that Christmas spirit is understanding that God is doing something that is bigger than each of us. And then finally, when we encounter the holiness of God and his grace for us, it leads us to circumspect surrender. Now, specifically what I'm saying is circumspect surrender. A lot of people like to say, oh yeah, religion is just for the birds. Religion is just for the people who are stupid. Religion is just, or following Jesus is just for people who don't have enough intelligence to figure out what's going on. But the reality is that those who follow Christ have actually considered things much deeper. And actually, so when we talk about circumspect surrender, in other words, we're doing it. We've thought about some of these things. And we're really willing to surrender. You see, look what happens here in verse 38. He says, see, this is what Mary, she's saying, see, I am the Lord's servant, said Mary. Now, that word there, we don't really think, it's translated servant in this version. But the word is dole. It specifically means a female slave. She's looking at the angel and she's saying, this is my position before my God. I am his female slave. I am fully surrendered to him and to his servants. Now, see, people would say, well, she's just blindly jumping into this. No. Mary understands the full risk of everything she's getting into. Mary understands that her husband doesn't know. Who's going to believe that an angel came to you? If I came to you and said an angel spoke to me, you're not going to believe it. And even when she went and told her betrothed, her husband to be, she told him, he didn't believe it. He's like, oh, you're pregnant. Okay, obviously. Okay, we'll be nice about it. I'll put her away. We'll divorce quietly. We won't say, we'll just put it on the side a little bit. I don't want to, God had to come speak to him as well to show him, this is a real thing. And that when we understand that what was Mary risking? Mary knew and understood very plainly that people would not believe that she was giving a birth to a child as a virgin, that she got pregnant as a virgin. Nobody was going to believe that. And so she risked being cast out from society. She risked carrying the reputation of being a whore. She risked carrying the reputation of never having someone that would marry her and to never be a part of being a mom and being a family mom and having that loving household and all those things. She risked all that. And she said, yeah, I am surrendered to my Lord completely. I'm his slave. I will do. And as a matter of fact, there is a complete surrender that she has thought through all of those options. And as a matter of fact, she ends her words this way. She says, may it happen to me as you have said. In other words, you say that I'm going to be impregnated by the Holy One. Let it be as you have said. It's not my life. It's your life. And you see, that is the spirit of Christmas. When the true spirit of Christmas starts, when God confronts us in holiness and we experience his unmerited grace, it radically changes us. It changes everything about us. It changes the way we think. It changes our motives. Man, there was a time, man, I thought I was going to be a truck driver for life. I thought maybe I'd be a country music singer. I thought maybe I was going to, I was going to be known for, certain different things. But now, you know what? When Jesus came into my life, it changed the complete direction. I didn't know a lot about a lot of things, but I knew one thing. I knew I wanted to be a champion for Jesus. I knew that I wanted him to be pleased with my life. I knew that I wanted him to take and use me however he wanted to. And that's what Jesus is saying. This is part of the true spirit of Christmas, right? Jesus comes and he takes our punishment away. He takes our sin. He takes us from a place of being unworthy where we realize that we're unworthy, and he loves us just because of the way we are. And that changes our, God, you love me despite of all this? You see this, the phases of this spirit, what we talk about, the spirit of Christmas. You see, in a Christmas carol, they come back in that show, right? They go back and they look at the Scrooge and he says, look, at one time you weren't such a bad guy. What happened? You screwed up. See, that's the message, part of the message, what the world is helping us to. There is a redemptive nature in this, but what God is saying, listen, look, we were never worthy, but I've loved you anyway. And it's that love that touches us that radically changes everything. So as we think about this, I'm going to throw out a few questions to think about. Have you ever felt unworthy of God's favor? Have you ever come to that place where you realized, wow, He's so much more holy, and there's no way I can live up to that? Listen, this is a good place to be, because it is in this good place where He does what? He shakes our foundation. So the next question we want to look at is, have you, when you've encountered His holiness, has it shaken you to your very foundations? This is not a bad place to be. This is a good place to be, because when we're there, we're able to experience His grace, right? Or the third question, does His calling on you seem more than what you are capable of not only doing, but being? You're saying, God, you're calling me to live holy. How can I be this way? I don't have my own strength to do this. You see? But then, and final question is, have you ever come to the place of complete circumspect surrender? In other words, God, I don't know all the answers to everything, but I've thought through who you are. I've thought through your holiness. I've thought through your power. I've thought through your reputation. I've thought through your ability to be able to fulfill and do the things that you have said you were going to do. And Lord, maybe I don't have all the answers, but I surrender to you and I trust you. This is the Christmas spirit. Father, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to share your word with my brothers and sisters. Lord, I know there are those who are hurting. Lord, those who are suffering and those who are in pain during this time. I want to just pray right now, Father, that you would touch them miraculously. May they know this place, Father, when we come to this place where our lives are shaken up by your holiness, or shaken up by your goodness. But then, Father, then we become all of a sudden, we're like, what's going on? And we have questions about life. But then now coming to the place where we realize that you have unconditionally loved us, that you have lavished your love upon us in such a way that the world would be embarrassed by it. This morning I pray, if there's one who is listening, that they have never come to that place where they have trusted in the Jesus Christ alone for salvation, that today would be that day. That they would say, Father, I know that I'm a sinner. I know that Jesus Christ died for my sins. And I know that He was buried, and I know that 3 days later He rose from the dead. And I confess with my mouth and believe in my heart this very thing. And Lord Jesus, I want to be like Mary. And I say to you, I am your slave. May it be to me as you have said. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us, and thankful you guys can't see him, but also thankful for Brother John, who's here helping in the background. Also, do want to share with you, if you are blessed by the ministry in any way and you want to give, we do have our slide here with our address, 211 Green Street. If you can give to that, we would definitely be appreciative of it. You can also, if you live locally, you can also just drop that in the mailbox. But we also have a QR code. So if you have your smartphone, and we've had a couple people test this, and if you just put that up to your screen and scan that, it'll take you directly to our giving page, and we would be much appreciative of it. And we thank you for giving in a spirit of joy, because you want to. And that's it. And thank you again so much for joining us. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week as we continue to look at what is the true Christmas spirit. God bless you.